What thoughts came to mind as you watched the scenario unfold? What inappropriate actions did the teacher exhibit? Would most parents have handled the situation the same way that the student's mother did? What are your thoughts? How could this type of inappropriate teacher student relationship be prevented? Knowing that an inappropriate relationship between an educator and a student can happen quickly reinforces the reason why the statistics are extremely sobering. According to Doug Phillips, Director of Educator Investigations with the Texas Education Agency, there has been more than a 50% increase in the number of investigations into inappropriate student teacher relationships in Texas in the past 7 years. Let's take a look at the trend over the last 4 years. As you can see, the number of educator misconduct investigations has been increasing each year. There were 188 cases involving inappropriate relationships opened during the 2014-15 school year. Roughly 100 of those educators were arrested. As of August 31st, 2016, there were a total of 1,090 open cases, including all types of educator misconduct investigations. After viewing the statistics and listening to the responses, it reinforces the fact that some educators put themselves in situations where they tread on dangerous ground by crossing boundaries with their students, especially when using social media. Let's review information that can help us become more aware of how this happens. A recent survey indicates that two-thirds of Americans are social media users. Although this data shows that the majority of educators use social media, those surveyed believe they have received minimal or no training in how to interact with students and parents through the use of social media. Knowing this information, we might be able to generalize that increased training for educators and the use of appropriate social media interactions with students could have a positive impact on decreasing inappropriate educator-student relationships. For the purposes of today's session, we'll briefly review a few grooming behaviors that are sometimes used by adults to initiate inappropriate relationships with students. The information will provide everyone with an awareness of how social media can become an accelerant in exploiting students through the use of grooming strategies. As a quick review, grooming is when an adult engages in increasingly inappropriate boundary violations to gain the trust of a student. These are just a few examples of how an adult can use social media to groom a student. Grooming students and grooming strategies set the stage for a possible sexual relationship with the students by determining their level of vulnerability. Social media interactions with the student can fuel grooming opportunities because of the unique capability to communicate secretly and frequently. These are just a few examples of what is termed grooming students. There are several more actions that fall under this category. We've covered a lot of information. I would like to conduct a quick check for understanding regarding appropriate versus inappropriate social media communications. I will read a couple of example texts between a teacher and a student. Hi, Mike, be a doll and send me your late assignment. I'm waiting. I've been busy. Can we make a deal? Depends on how good the deal is, babe. I'll Snapchat you with a great deal. What alarms are going off based on the content of these text messages? In this string of text messages, the teacher initiated an interaction that was not professional and clearly crossed a boundary with the student. Mrs. Z opened the door to the inappropriate banter that occurred between them. All the students should not have responded like he did. It was the teacher's responsibility to prevent this type of banter. Now let's briefly review one more teacher-student interaction. Hello, Mike. A quick reminder to send me your assignment. It was due yesterday. Thank you, Miss Z. I will send it tomorrow. Sorry it's late. Your graded paper will be posted to your school Dropbox account. What aspects of this text interaction provide evidence of appropriate communication between a teacher and a student. What would you do if you began to receive text messages from one of your students that were showing signs of inappropriate connotations? As an educator, we must hold firm to boundaries when complex situations are presented. We must find ways to redirect inappropriate behavior by students that can blur relationship lines. At all times, we must ensure that we keep clear boundaries between ourselves and our students. You've provided great information. It's time to direct our attention to what the law expects from us regarding appropriate use of social media with our students. Texas Administrative Code provides us with guidance to determine whether an online communication with the student is inappropriate. The following factors may be considered in assessing whether the social media communication is inappropriate. This is the first factor that should be considered when determining if a social media communication is considered inappropriate. Was the communication made openly, or did the educator attempt to conceal it? Could the communication be interpreted as soliciting contact or a romantic relationship? Was the communication sexually explicit? Did it involve discussion of a sexual nature regarding either the educator or the student? The exchange of inappropriate text messages we reviewed earlier violated this ethics standard. The messages involved secrecy, sexual connotations, frequent communications, romantic involvement, and other things. The law is specific and leaves no room for interpretation regarding inappropriate relationships with students. The consequences for having an inappropriate educator student relationships are specific as well. The loss of career and the loss of freedom are two consequences that can be devastating. Let's review a few social media guidelines that support appropriate teacher student interactions. Be aware of what you post online. You represent not only yourself, but also your school district. Follow your district's policy for electronic and online communication. This information is included in the employee handbook. Be transparent by maintaining openness, visibility, and accountability. Consider all electronic communication to be accessible and a matter of record. Choose appropriate subject matter and words that are courteous, grammatically correct, and professional. The more consistent we are as a school district and as individual educators, the greater the propensity for developing positive ways to communicate with our students, especially through the use of social media. In reflecting on these social media guidelines, it's important to note that administrators are catching on and checking up. The Washington Post reported about a Missouri superintendent who, during interviews, insists that job applicants show him their Facebook page. It makes one stop to think about how our individual social media pages would fare in that situation. Districts have approved platforms for use with students. If you choose to use your own source outside of what is stated in your district's policy, you are opening yourself up for disciplinary action, including possible termination. There are several strategies school districts can implement to decrease and eliminate the number of violations. Let's take a look at just a few. Schools can provide educator ethics training with a special emphasis on social media. They can strengthen and communicate district social media utilization policies and guidelines. In addition, schools should report incidents consistently and in a timely manner, expand accountability for withholding information, and acknowledge that schools will reinforce a zero tolerance policy regarding educator misconduct. It's time to apply what we have learned. Please write a reflection on your own paper. regarding the information that we've discussed. Presented a lot of information. If you have any questions, please contact your HR director.